Welcome the anointed ones. There's a moment in every chosen one's journey when the world realizes, hold on, they know something they're not telling us. That's the moment everything changes. Not because you exposed anyone, not because you confronted anyone, and not because you made some dramatic announcement, but because people finally felt the depth of what you carry. It's the quiet panic that rises when someone realizes the person they underestimated has been 10 steps ahead the entire time. And here's a psychological fact. Human beings fear what they cannot measure. When people sense that you understand motives, patterns, and truths they thought they hid perfectly, their brain does something funny. It defaults into talk mode. Suddenly, everyone becomes a commentator, an analyst, an investigator, and a reporter on you. It's not because you're unpredictable. It's because you're too predictable. You keep seeing the real story behind their scripted behavior, and that alone makes your existence feel like a threat to their comfort. People talk because they know you noticed what they pretended not to do. People whisper because they remember what you never mentioned. People gossip because they can feel that you've already connected the dots they hoped were scattered. And the irony, you're not even trying. You're just paying attention, which honestly should have been their first clue. A chosen one paying attention is like a detective with a spiritual Wi-Fi connection. It picks up everything. Now they're unsettled, restless, and low-key stressed because your silence didn't equal ignorance. It equaled awareness. And awareness is something people can't outrun, no matter how fast they rearrange their stories. They know you know more than you're saying, and that's exactly why your name hasn't left their mouth since you left the room. So buckle up, because in this video, we're going to break down exactly why people can't stop talking about you, and why your knowledge, intuition, and perception have become the unspoken headline in their private conversations. Number one, they're terrified because you see the layer beneath the layer. People talk about you because they finally realize they can't hide anything from you. Not their tone, not their intentions, not the shift in their energy when they thought you weren't paying attention. You don't just hear words, you notice the cracks in between them. You don't just observe actions, you recognize the motive sitting under the action. And that alone puts you in a category most people aren't prepared to deal with. What unsettles them is how naturally you do it. You don't snoop, you don't pry, you don't dig. You simply notice. That noticing is powerful because it makes people feel as if you're reading a script they never meant to share. They feel exposed in your presence, not because you call them out, but because you see them clearly without trying. For some people, clarity is more frightening than confrontation. They talk because your perception interrupted their performance. They had a role they wanted you to believe, a version of themselves they carefully presented. But the real version slipped through, and you caught it instantly. You caught the small hesitation before they lied. You caught the sudden friendliness after they needed something. You caught the forced smile when their intentions weren't genuine. Most people miss these moments. You don't. And they know you don't. That's why their voice shakes a bit around you. That's why they over-explain things you never asked about. That's why they rehearse conversations in their head before talking to you. They're not preparing for a discussion. They're preparing a defense. The truth is, you operate on a level of awareness that makes dishonesty uncomfortable. You see the layer beneath the layer, the motive beneath the behavior. And because you don't rush to react or expose, your silence becomes a mirror. They don't know what you're thinking, but they're painfully aware you're thinking something. So the talking begins. Not because you did something wrong, but because you saw too much. Not because you're unpredictable, but because your intuition is too accurate for their comfort. People talk the most when they feel the most seen. And you? You've been seeing people with clarity they didn't expect you to survive with. Number 2, your intuition has receipts they wish didn't exist. People can't stop talking about you because deep down they know you caught things they thought were perfectly hidden. You didn't argue, you didn't confront, you didn't get into a back and forth trying to prove what you felt. You simply watched, understood, and stored the truth. And that unsettles people in a way they can't shake off. Your intuition doesn't just sense energy. It remembers details, patterns, shifts, and motives with uncomfortable accuracy. What really bothers them is that you never needed proof the way most people do. You saw a small change in their behavior and knew exactly what it meant. You caught the inconsistency in their story and knew what they were trying to cover. You noticed the sudden kindness that only appeared when they needed something. These may seem like small things to others, but to you, they clicked together like puzzle pieces. You quietly connected dots they hoped you'd never even see. The part that scares them the most is that you're not loud about any of it. You don't run around exposing people. You don't try to embarrass them. Your calmness is what keeps them awake at night. They know you know something, but they don't know how much you know. They don't know which moment exposed them. They don't know which gesture gave them away. And they definitely don't know how long you've been aware of the truth. Your intuition kept receipts, silent, accurate, and undeniable. And the moment they realized that, their confidence cracked. They became more defensive, more talkative, more eager to explain things you never questioned. They're trying to rewrite a history you already decoded a long time ago. They're hoping your silence means you didn't understand what happened, when the reality is you understood too much. Your intuition is the one thing they couldn't outrun. It didn't scream. It didn't accuse. It simply exposed everything by recognizing what their behavior tried to disguise. And now they talk about you because they're scared of the version of themselves you've already seen, the version they hoped you'd never have evidence of. Number 3, they study you because you're the only one they couldn't manipulate. People talk so much about you because, in their eyes, you represent the one thing they couldn't bend, reshape, or control. You were the one person who didn't fall for their charm, their tactics, or their emotional shortcuts. They're used to influencing people with guilt, pressure, flattery, or confusion, and when none of that worked on you, it created a dent in their confidence. You became the unsolved case they keep revisiting long after you've moved on. The truth is, manipulators survive off predictability. They depend on people reacting in the same old ways so they can pull the same old strings, but you broke their pattern. You didn't react the way they expected, and you didn't give them the emotional responses they needed to stay in control. You stayed grounded. You stayed aware. You saw through their behavior before they even finished their performance. That alone separated you from everyone else they've ever dealt with. What truly bothers them is how effortlessly you bypassed their games. They were prepared to guide your thoughts, shape your choices, and influence your emotions, but instead, you responded with clarity that disarmed them. They couldn't trigger you. They couldn't trap you. They couldn't get you to play along. And people never forget the one person who saw through their strategies. Now they study you, not because they admire you, but because they're trying to figure out what went wrong. They replay conversations in their mind, trying to pinpoint where their manipulation failed. They compare you to others, trying to understand why their tactics worked everywhere else but collapsed in front of you. The obsession grows because your strength exposed their weakness. Their control only works on people who don't recognize it. They keep talking because losing control over someone like you bruised their ego deeply. They can't accept that the game ended the moment you realize there was one being played. And while they're stuck analyzing you from a distance, you're living freely, untouched by the influence they once believed they had. Number 4, they talk because you didn't react the way their script demanded. People can't stop talking about you because you broke the storyline they carefully built in their head. They came prepared with a script, the version of you they expected, the reaction they planned for, the emotional response they were counting on. They thought they knew exactly how you'd behave, exactly what buttons to push, and exactly which emotions to pull out of you. And then you did the one thing they never prepared for. You didn't react. You didn't give them chaos. You didn't give them tears. You didn't give them anger. You didn't give them the meltdown they rehearsed for. Instead, you chose control, clarity, and elevation. That decision alone shook their entire plan. The moment they realized their usual tactics weren't landing, they were forced to confront a reality they didn't want to admit. You've outgrown their influence. Their power depended entirely on you responding the same way you once did, and when you didn't, everything they built fell apart. This is where the talking begins. They have to talk because they need to rewrite the narrative in a way that makes sense to them. They can't accept that you didn't break. They can't accept that you didn't fall apart. They definitely can't accept that your peace wasn't fake. It was intentional. So, they start spinning stories to justify why their efforts didn't work. It's the only way they can soothe their bruised ego. The truth is, they were ready for a person they no longer had access to. They showed up with a script, and you showed up with growth. They tried to trigger your old wounds, forgetting you had healed. They tried to control your reactions, forgetting you had matured. They tried to create drama, forgetting you had exited the stage completely. Your lack of reaction wasn't weakness, it was evolution. And evolution confuses people who depend on your old identity. That confusion turns into gossip, because when people lose control of the story, they try to control the conversation instead. Number 5, your presence revealed their poverty of character. People can't stop talking about you because, without even trying, you brought out truths in them they never wanted to face. You didn't call them out. You didn't embarrass them. You didn't put their flaws on display. All you did was show up as yourself, steady, genuine, honest, and aligned. And that alone exposed the gap between who they pretended to be and who they really were. Your character didn't just speak, it illuminated. And when light hits anything that's been hiding, it reacts. Your presence created a kind of pressure that had nothing to do with judgment and everything to do with authenticity. People who rely on filters and facades feel extremely uncomfortable standing next to someone who lives in truth. They start adjusting themselves, fixing their words, watching their tone, overthinking simple conversations, all because your integrity quietly revealed the parts of themselves they'd been avoiding. They weren't intimidated by you. They were intimidated by what your character reflected back at them. The moment they realized they couldn't maintain the version of themselves they wanted you to believe, the talking started. It wasn't about you, it was about their own discomfort. They needed to redirect attention away from the fact that your genuine spirit made their shallow behavior harder to hide. Gossip becomes a distraction, a way to shift the spotlight so no one notices how insecure they felt next to you. Your presence didn't expose them. Their reaction to your presence did. You simply carried a kind of consistency and honesty that many people can't maintain. While they operated from ego, you operated from a place that didn't need approval. While they built their identity on performance, you built yours on truth. When someone like you enters the room, the contrast becomes undeniable. People don't talk because you're flawed. They talk because your character highlighted their flaws. Your authenticity didn't compete with their facade. It made it unnecessary. And rather than grow, they chose gossip. It's easier for them to talk about you than to confront the fact that your presence revealed everything they were trying to hide. Number 6, they can't decode how you see through people before they reveal themselves. People talk about you because you have a way of understanding things long before they unfold. and that unnerves them. You don't need someone to confess, slip up, or expose their intentions. You catch the pattern instantly. You see the rhythm of their behavior, the shift in their tone, the sudden change in attitude, the timing of their actions. You don't wait for proof, because the signs speak loud enough. And when someone realizes you've understood their motives before they even acted on them, it throws them off balance. Most people rely on hiding behind confusion or chaos. They depend on others being slow to notice, slow to react, slow to understand. But you operate differently. You catch the story before it's told. You sense the crack before the collapse. You recognize the motive before the behavior even forms. That level of awareness feels almost unfair to people who built their whole personality on pretending. The part that really scares them is that you never confront them. You don't expose them. You don't announce what you know. Your silence feels like surveillance to them because they can't figure out what you've picked up or how much you've decoded. They don't know what you've seen, but they can tell you've seen something. So the talking begins, not to discuss you, but to comfort themselves from the anxiety of not knowing what you know. Your ability to read people without effort feels spiritual because it is. It's not something you learned, it's something you carry. You're spiritually informed in ways most people can't comprehend. You understand intentions through energy, truth through patterns, and deception through inconsistencies. People can't decode how you do this, and because they can't explain it, they turn it into conversation. They talk because your intuition dismantles their plans before they even begin. They talk because your awareness makes their secrets feel unsafe. They talk because your insight removes their advantage. And deep down, they talk because they know there's nothing more terrifying to someone with hidden motives than a person who sees through them without needing a single word. Number 7. You hold information that could shift the power dynamic instantly. People talk about you because they know you carry truths they never wanted you to recognize. You've seen things clearly, the alliances formed behind your back, the conversations whispered in corners, the motives that didn't match the smiles. You picked up on every shift, every hidden agenda, every double-sided gesture, and that alone puts a certain pressure in the air. Because those who underestimated you now realize you hold information that could change everything with a single sentence. You could expose what was said. You could reveal who betrayed who. You could unravel the connections they tried to keep in the dark. You could flip their entire network inside out simply by speaking. And the unnerving part for them is this: you don't. Your restraint terrifies them more than your awareness ever could. When someone knows the truth and stays calm, it forces people to confront their own guilt. They become jumpy, paranoid, overly sensitive, and suspicious of your silence. They start wondering what you'll do with what you know. They replay old moments in their head. They watch their words around you. They try to guess how much you've connected behind the scenes. Your self-control exposes their lack of it. Fraudulent people are used to dealing with others who break down, lash out, or respond impulsively. But you didn't react. You didn't crumble. You didn't turn information into chaos. You held it with discipline, clarity, and maturity. That level of restraint is rare, and it scares people who rely on secrecy to stay powerful. They know if you ever decided to speak, the entire power dynamic would shift instantly. Relationships would crumble, alliances would fall apart, and masks would drop in real time. So the talking becomes a shield. They gossip to get ahead of a truth you haven't even bothered to release. They exaggerate stories to distract from what they fear you might expose. They try to control the narrative because they know they can't control you. Your knowledge isn't the threat. Your calmness is. Your clarity is. Your silence is. And the moment they realized you're powerful enough to destroy them, but disciplined enough not to, they understood you were never the problem. Their fear was. Number 8, your silence isn't weakness, it's strategic intelligence. People talk about you because they finally realized your silence was never about being intimidated, confused, or unsure. It was calculated. It was deliberate. It was the kind of silence that studies a person, evaluates their actions, and waits for the truth to reveal itself without you lifting a finger. You weren't holding back because you lacked something. You were holding back because you were gathering everything. Most people are used to silence that comes from fear or uncertainty. They're used to silence that folds under pressure or tries to avoid conflict. But your silence didn't behave like that. Yours had weight. It had direction. It had purpose. You were watching how people moved when they thought you weren't paying attention. You were noticing who changed depending on the audience. You were taking mental notes on what someone said, how they said it, and what they tried to hide between the lines. Your silence wasn't passive, it was investigative. You weren't swallowing your emotions, you were studying their character. You weren't avoiding truth, you were letting it reveal itself at its own pace. That's what unsettles people. They can't tell what you know when you figured it out, or how much you've already understood. They sense that you aren't reacting emotionally. You're analyzing spiritually, mentally, and intuitively. And nothing terrifies someone with hidden intentions more than a person who listens more than they speak. Your silence made people aware of their own behavior. It forced them to sit in their own truth without you saying a word. It pressured them to reveal more than they intended because they couldn't read your reactions. They didn't know if you were agreeing, disagreeing, catching on, or seeing deeper than they expected. That uncertainty creates anxiety, and anxiety always leads to talking. They talk to fill the gaps you leave open. They talk to guess what you're thinking. They talk to soften their guilt. They talk because your silence puts their actions under a microscope without you ever acting like you're holding one. The truth is, your silence is strategy. It's the way you separate sincerity from performance. It's how you decide who deserves access and who doesn't. And because people can't decode your stillness, they create stories to explain it. Your silence isn't weakness. It's the kind of intelligence that makes people realize they're being understood at a level they can't control. Number 9, people talk. Because you broke their predictive model. People talk about you because everything they thought they knew about you turned out to be wrong. They approached you with a fixed idea of how you'd react, how you'd think, how you'd feel, and how you'd handle pressure. They treated you like someone who would always stay the same, someone they could read, control, or forecast with ease. But then something happened that disrupted the entire framework they built around you. You grew. You evolved in ways they didn't see coming. You upgraded mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and even behaviorally. And when a person evolves faster than others can adapt, it shakes the foundation of every assumption people had about them. They expected predictable reactions. They expected old patterns. They expected familiar responses. Instead, you started moving with clarity, wisdom, and emotional maturity they had never seen from you before. You stopped taking the bait. You stopped over-explaining. You stopped giving them access to your vulnerability. You started making decisions from a place of strength rather than survival. And when someone can no longer predict you, their sense of control collapses. The talking begins because confusion needs an outlet. They don't understand how the person they thought they had figured out suddenly became unreadable. They don't understand how someone they once underestimated now carries the composure of someone who's lived through a full transformation. They don't understand how the version of you that used to be easy to manipulate has been replaced by someone who sees through their intentions instantly. So they gather in small circles and discuss you. They compare notes. They try to match their experiences to someone else's story to make sense of you. They're trying to rebuild a narrative that you've already outgrown. Instead of evolving with you, they're analyzing you from the level you left behind. What they fail to realize is that you didn't become complicated. You became aligned. You didn't become unpredictable. You became wise. They didn't lose the ability to understand you. They lost access to the old version of you that made their predictions possible. And because they can't adjust to the new you, talking becomes their only tool. They speak not because you're confusing, but because your evolution broke the script they tried to write for your life. Number 10, you're a walking mirror, and most people can't survive their own reflection in you. The discomfort people feel around you has nothing to do with your personality. It's their subconscious realizing, I am not who I pretend to be. You don't expose people by speaking, you expose them simply by existing. Your energy forces their masks to malfunction. You ever notice how someone can dislike you before you've even said a single word? That's because your presence highlights the fractures in their character, the lies they tell themselves, the motives they hide, the weaknesses they refuse to acknowledge. When people talk about you, criticize you, or twist your image, they're not reacting to you. They're reacting to the distorted version of themselves that surfaces whenever you're near. You become a spiritual diagnostic tool, revealing everything they tried to bury. Most people can't handle a mirror that doesn't flatter them. And you reflect truth, not vanity, not ego-soothing illusions. You reveal, you don't remind people of who they are. You remind them of who they pretended to be. And that's why they talk. That's why they gather in circles to dissect you. That's why they need other people's confirmation to justify their discomfort. You didn't do anything wrong. You just revealed too much by standing there. You are the reflection they spent their entire life avoiding. Number 11, you never needed their validation. And that's the exact moment their ego collapsed under its own weight. People don't get offended when you reject them. They get offended when you don't need them. They had you categorized in their mind. Someone who would depend on their approval, adjust to their preferences, or shrink yourself to fit their comfort zone. They assumed they were the reference point, the standard by which you measured your worth. Then you did something they didn't expect. You stopped asking for their permission to exist, and that's when their ego cracked. Because the moment they realized you were self-sustaining, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, their entire psychological strategy lost its power. They couldn't regulate you. They couldn't influence your direction. They couldn't make you chase their attention like everyone else does. You exposed that the importance they projected was artificial. And your independence didn't just deny them control. It revealed how fragile their sense of superiority really was. The validation they thought you needed was actually the validation they secretly relied on to feel relevant. So now they talk. Not out of confidence, but out of injury. Not out of superiority, but out of insecurity. Not because you failed them, but because you stopped giving them an identity to attach themselves to. Your lack of dependence stripped them of the role they imagined they played in your story. You weren't rebelling. You weren't proving a point. You simply outgrew the pedestal they built for themselves. And nothing terrifies an ego more than a soul that refuses to bow. Number 12, they're confused because you know their truth, but you still choose peace. People talk about you because they can't reconcile two things at once. The fact that you saw them for exactly who they were, and the fact that you didn't let it control you. Most people would have reacted, retaliated, exploded, or plotted revenge. Most people would have matched their energy with drama, anger, or exposure. You didn't. You didn't need to. You analyzed. You healed. You detached. You elevated. You didn't just rise above their games. You removed yourself entirely from the battlefield they assumed they owned. That kind of calm, measured power is alien to people who operate on chaos, manipulation, and reactive tactics. It's not just that you didn't fight back, it's that your response didn't even exist in their system. They can't code your behavior into their expectations, so they default to talking. Their gossip is a product of confusion. They try to justify why their strategies failed. They replay their own actions in their heads, wondering why you didn't crumble the way everyone else would have. They try to convince others, and sometimes themselves, that you must be hiding, planning, or scheming too, because their minds can't comprehend a person who sees the truth and still chooses integrity and peace over retaliation. This is why they over-explain, overreact, and overanalyze every encounter with you. They are trying to find the gap, the weakness, the trigger, the flaw, but there isn't one. Your composure, your awareness, and your restraint create a kind of tension they've never experienced before. It unsettles them because they expected leverage, and instead they were met with understanding. They expected chaos, and instead they were met with clarity. Your peace is more powerful than their noise. Your control is more revealing than their words. And their constant talking is the only tool they have left to process a reality they can't dominate. They speak because your choice to rise above proves, silently but indelibly, that power and truth don't need to be loud to be absolute. Number 13. Your gift of perception has no off switch, and they felt it. People talk about you because they've never met someone whose awareness feels this sharp, this constant, and this natural. Your perception doesn't blink, it doesn't pause, and it doesn't soften just to make people comfortable. You notice things most people ignore, not because you're trying to expose anyone, but because your mind is trained to register truth before your emotions even react to it. People felt it every time they interacted with you. The way your eyes didn't just look at them, but seemed to look through them. The way you picked up on shifts in tone, inconsistencies in stories, or the tension behind their polite smiles. You didn't overthink it, you simply understood it. And for those who rely on confusion, disguise, or emotional camouflage, that level of insight feels threatening. They could feel you catching every detail they hoped would go unnoticed. The hesitation before they spoke, the contradiction in their explanation, the motive behind their kindness. They felt exposed even when you didn't say a single word about what you saw. It wasn't intimidation through force. It was discomfort through accuracy. Your perception worked like a mirror they didn't ask to look into. Here's the part that really unsettled them. Your perception isn't selective, and it isn't something you can turn off. It follows you in every room, every conversation, every dynamic. You don't try to read people, you just do. You don't try to connect dots, they simply appear. That's why people gossip. They're trying to create distance from the version of themselves they fear you've already figured out. To them, your awareness feels supernatural because it can't be tricked, manipulated, or distracted. It cuts through performance and picks up the truth beneath the surface. And even if you never confront them, they know you know. That's the real trigger. It's not your intelligence, honesty, or intuition alone. It's the fact that your perception exposes people without you ever needing to reveal a thing. So they talk. Because talking is easier than admitting that you saw them before they even understood themselves. Number 14, you know more. Because you see from a level they haven't grown into yet. People talk about you because your mind doesn't operate on the same plane they're used to. What they label as mystery, secretiveness, or weird intuition is simply a level of awareness they haven't matured into. You aren't hiding anything. You're not withholding deep cosmic secrets or playing spiritual chess. You're just thinking from a place they haven't evolved to understand yet. Your insight comes from a combination of experience, discernment, and spiritual depth that didn't happen overnight. It's the product of everything you've survived, unlearned, healed, and rebuilt. While they're still reacting to surface-level situations, you're interpreting patterns, cycles, intentions, and spiritual roots. You're reading reality in layers, not headlines. And because they can't see those layers, they assume you must be intentionally unclear or too deep. To them, you look unpredictable. To you, you're simply aware. To them, you seem complex. To you, they're missing half the picture. To them, you feel intimidating. To you, you're just awake. Their confusion becomes conversations. Their insecurity becomes gossip. Their lack of understanding becomes theories about you. Because people rarely admit when someone else has simply outgrown the level of consciousness they operate in, it's easier to talk about you than acknowledge their own stagnation. They don't understand how you can sense danger before it happens, recognize sincerity without needing proof, or know who's genuine without a long explanation. They don't understand why your prayers hit differently, why your intuition is accurate, or why you move with confidence without revealing your logic. It's because you're processing from a higher vantage point, a place where everything connects, aligns, and reveals itself. Your mind isn't ahead of them to be superior. It's ahead because you did the work they avoided. You healed where they hid. You grew where they paused. You elevated where they stayed comfortable. That's why they talk. Not because you're mysterious, but because you're mature. Not because you're hiding, but because they're not ready to see what you already understand. Conclusion. At this point, it's clear why people can't stop talking about you. It's not about ego, drama, or superficial attention. It's about recognition, the unspoken acknowledgement that you operate on a level they haven't reached, that your perception is too sharp for their comfort, and that your character exposes truths they've spent a lifetime hiding from themselves. Every glance, every word, every decision you make ripples through their world because it reflects clarity, strength, and awareness they can't replicate. You've seen patterns before they form. You've held truths without needing to broadcast them. You've chosen peace where others expected chaos. You've walked through manipulations unshaken, elevated where others crumbled, and silently collected every detail that revealed the reality they wished you'd ignore. Your presence alone challenges, exposes, and shifts the environment around you, and that terrifies people who thrive on control, deception, and predictability. The reason they talk isn't because they have power over you. It's because they've lost the power they thought they had. You've become the standard of authenticity they can't reach, the measure of wisdom they can't attain, and the mirror of truth they refuse to face. Their conversations about you are simply echoes of the discomfort your growth has caused. Discomfort they try to soothe by filling the silence with noise. But here's the brilliance. You don't need to engage, explain, or justify yourself. You've already won simply by being unbothered, aligned, and aware. Their words are not chains. They're evidence that your presence is undeniable, your insight is unmatched, and your evolution is unstoppable. You don't compete. You don't manipulate. You don't need their validation, because your energy, clarity, and wisdom speak louder than any rumor or gossip ever could. If this message resonated with you, and you recognize the power of being a chosen one who can't be understood or controlled, then make sure you stay connected. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss another deep dive into your truth. Like this video to show that awareness and discernment matter. Comment below and share your experiences because your voice adds value to this conversation. And don't forget to share this video with anyone who needs a reminder of how unstoppable they really are. The world may try to talk about you, but your presence will always speak louder than their words. God bless you.